I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's take a look at Ukraine, and let's look at it now from their side, what's going on in the country, because we've done a lot of videos on the Trump-Zelensky call and all this stuff that's going on in the U.S., but I want to focus this video on Ukraine itself, the country, the politics, the economics, and the trouble that Zelensky is now facing from a variety of points and a variety of factors now. One of them is the phone call with Trump. He is getting some backlash from that as well. But when he won the elections and he became president and he displaced Poroshenko, we knew he had a lot of challenges ahead, a lot of challenges. Yes. And we were very curious to see how he would handle those challenges. And he had a difficult position, irregardless of what was happening with Trump in that phone call. Trump in that phone call is actually another problem that this guy does not need on his shoulders. But there you go. So, Alexander, take us into Ukraine. What's going on?
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Can I just say, first of all, that, we've always been a bit skeptical on the Duran about the whole Zelensky operation, because Zelensky, we must not forget, is not a traditional politician. He is a person who is a TV actor and a comic. And of course, he's also operating in an incredibly tough and very brutal environment. And the essential thing always to understand about Ukraine is you may have the votes of the people behind you, which Zelensky did. He won the election. He became president with the support of 70% of the people of Ukraine. His party won a landslide victory in the parliamentary elections a few weeks later. But in Ukraine, power is not decided through the ballot box. On two occasions, in 2004 and in 2014, the government, the democratically elected government, was overthrown by violent protests, through violent protests. There are armed ultra-right-wing neo-Nazi militias operating there. And of course, the traditional power brokers of the country are the country's very powerful oligarchs, who are not, we should understand, they're not business people. They may operate various businesses, but they are basically dealers in political power. So the big question is, how would Zelensky be able to take on all of these various people, all these various forces in Ukraine? And I'm sorry to say, he is not succeeding. He's trying rather ineffectually to clean up the political system. He's trying to bring prosecutions against Poroshenko, the former president, who is himself an oligarch, and other members of the Poroshenko government. That seems to be provoking increasing resistance to him from these forces within Ukraine. He's having to lean increasingly, it seems, to another oligarch, Kolomoisky, who is pushing to reacquire possession of his former bank, Privatbank, which Poroshenko basically seized from him. And at the same time, Zelensky's attempts, which are essential, their success is essential if he is going to stabilize Ukraine, his attempts to try to achieve some kind of peace settlement in eastern Ukraine are running into severe trouble, because a few weeks ago, under severe pressure from the Germans and the French, he agreed to something called the Steinmeier formula, which is a formula for a mutual drawdown of forces in eastern Ukraine, followed by elections there. But already the right-wing militias are resisting, and the army, which is dominated by ultra-right forces, appears to be simply disobeying his orders. So we are seeing a situation where everything is stuck. Nothing he is doing seems to be working. His popularity is falling, and there are now growing protests against him. And those protests are very dangerous because, as I said before, two previous on two previous occasions, the government fell in Ukraine because of protests on the street in Maidan Square, organized by the very same right-wing national forces which have Zelensky now on their sides.
Yeah, this really reminds me of the time when Putin came into power and
Yeah.
he, dealt with the oligarchs, and he dealt with them,
Yes.
fairly swiftly and effectively. And, it seems that Zelensky has those types of good intentions, at least on the surface. That's what it looks like. And it looks like he's trying to deal with corruption and with these oligarchs, with the situation in the East and all these various challenges. But it doesn't seem like he's quite got a handle as to what's going on. And I've been reading on various outlets, and maybe you can confirm this, Alexander, that, Poroshenko and many other oligarchs are now actually aligning against him. And they're trying to actually, create Maidan-like protests and uprisings to throw him out of office, to collapse his government. And I'm sure, along with Poroshenko and these guys, I'm sure you have guys like Soros and, some, very shady and disgusting characters that are usually involved in these types of operations, funneling money into this type of project. So take us a little bit as to what's going on there.
Yes. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right to make this comparison between Ukraine and Russia, because, of course, in the 1990s, Russia was very like Ukraine. I mean, it too was dominated by oligarchs in this totally corrupted political system, and there were also, violence. There was a great deal of street violence in Russia, as there is now in Ukraine, and a fact which people consistently and continuously forget. In 1994, the Russian Parliament was actually, 1994, the Russian Parliament was actually dispersed by force. The president of Ukraine, Boris Yeltsin, tore up Russia's constitution, and with the backing of the oligarchs, actually violently dispersed the country's parliament. But the fundamental difference with Ukraine, there were two things that I think were fundamentally different. Firstly, in Russia is a country with a very, very long continuous history. I mean, before today's Russian Federation, there was the Soviet Union. Before the Soviet Union, there was the Russian Federation. The institutions in Russia have tremendous sense of continuity and service towards a state and the ideal of a state, which is Russia. So the army, the police, the bureaucracy, or many people within the army, the police and the bureaucracy, ached to support a movement to clean up the mess and to put the oligarchs in their place. And the moment somebody appeared who was prepared to give them a lead, they were prepared to respond to it. That was one major difference. The other huge critical difference was in the personalities of the two people who took charge. Vladimir Putin, I know he's not very popular with some people in the West, but he is an extremely effective and exceptionally intelligent political leader. He is also a very, very strong leader and somebody who knows, firstly, how to play a waiting game, as he did with some of the oligarchs. He knows exactly when to strike, as he did when he struck first against Berezovsky, the leading oligarch, shortly after he became president, and then against Khodorkovsky, who ran the oil industry a few years after. And he times his moves and is able to project to the Russian people an appearance of confidence and authority. Zelensky and Ukraine don't have those two assets. Firstly, Ukraine's institutions do not have that sense of tradition and institutional continuity that Russia's do. Ukraine only became an independent country in 1991. Ukraine's institutions have been completely taken over by the oligarchs. The army is, to a great extent, itself a ragbag of right-wing militias controlled by the oligarchs who pay for large parts of it. So he doesn't have that institutional base to draw upon. And Zelensky himself is not a match for Putin. And he did something which was extremely revealing of this. Firstly, he spent a lot of the time after he became president avoiding the media. Then he decided to copy Putin by holding a massive TV marathon. Putin does this every year, and he does it superbly well, and he fields questions, and he's always on top of every question that gets fired at him. He does this with the media itself, and then he often does it with ordinary people who are invited to ask questions. Zelensky, when he tried to copy Putin, merely showed the difference. He is simply not up to that. He doesn't have the skill to do that sort of thing. So his attempt to do it simply exposed, in my opinion, the fact that he is not a real politician, not a real leader, the way that Putin is. So yes, I agree. I think he has all the good intentions. He clearly doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have the advisors around him that Putin did when he became president of Russia or leader of Russia in 2000, and he doesn't have the institutional base that Putin is able to draw upon and was able to draw upon then. So he's floundering. The thing is starting to unravel, and the reports you are receiving that the oligarchs are beginning to close ranks. They're beginning to combine against him. And that Poroshenko himself is playing a major role in all of this, are exactly right. Because to the extent that Zelensky is not one of them and has committed himself to cleaning up Ukraine, he is perceived by the oligarchs as a danger. And this is, of course, where the Trump-Zelensky call comes in. Because what the oligarchs would have seen in that is Zelensky promising Trump Ukraine's cooperation to clean up Ukraine. In other words, to go against the oligarchs and to get to the bottom of many of the things that have been going on. Burisma Holdings being one of those things, but far more importantly, the way in which the oligarchs themselves, because, Ukraine, ultimately we're talking about the oligarchs, themselves meddled in the 2016 US election. So this has spooked the oligarchs. They now see Zelensky as an enemy. They're uniting against him. They're manipulating the ultranationalists and neo-Nazis who are very strong in Ukraine. There may not be many of them, but they've got guns and they're well organized, and they do not want to see any kind of negotiation with the Eastern Ukrainians. And we're looking, I'm afraid, at the beginnings, the possible beginnings of a future coup.
Who has Zelensky's back, Alexander? The European Union doesn't want to deal with Ukraine anymore. I think that's patently obvious. Maybe there was a time where they were, trying to move Ukraine outside of Russia's orbit, so to speak, yes, and get them into the EU. They don't have a stomach for it anymore.
No.
They don't care about Ukraine. Trump has said many times outside of this Zelensky phone call, Trump has also signaled, very much unlike Obama, that he doesn't really care about Obama's, regime change operation in Ukraine. He doesn't want to deal with it either. Who has Zelensky's back? Because the picture that you're painting of a president who has these very powerful forces lining up against him doesn't have the managerial skill, the team, and the tools to take on these powerful forces. And the most troubling to me, when you're looking at a coup situation, doesn't even have full control of the military because that's been paid off and bought out by these oligarchs. And this is these are some sinister forces in the military.
Yes.
Real, neo-Nazis, real extremists.
Yes.
How's this guy going to make it?
Yeah, I mean, he's got one thing working for him, which is, I think, if there was a violent coup in Ukraine over the next few months, which overthrew Zelensky and brought someone else to power in that kind of way, I think the EU would be deeply alarmed, because from their point of view, I mean, it'd be very, very difficult to explain this one away, given the fact that they themselves have admitted that Poroshenko was a failure, and they have recognized Zelensky as a democratically elected leader. I think the EU would be really rather upset if that happened. What they would do, I don't know, but I suspect that they are probably saying, to the extent that they can, to some of the oligarchs, hold back. You may not like this man, but at the end of the day, if you actually overthrow him, you risk jeopardizing the whole future of Ukraine, because it's quite likely at that point that the whole thing will just fall apart and disintegrate. So that's one thing he has working for him. Now, as to who might be willing to back him, I'm going to suggest two possible groups of people. Firstly, Donald Trump. Let's not forget Donald Trump. Donald Trump is interested in what is going on in Ukraine, because putting aside the question of Burisma Holdings, which is, as I said, I think has been given in some ways too much importance, for Donald Trump, his priority now is to get to the bottom of what happened with Russiagate. Donald Trump has also signaled that he wants some kind of rapprochement with Russia. He's been consistent about this, and the major geopolitical obstacle, now that Syria is on the way to being sorted out, the major point of conflict with Russia is Ukraine. So if he can somehow stabilize and sort out Ukraine, he might be able to move forward with this rapprochement with Russia. Unlikely, though, I have to say that seems. Now, if he's going to stabilize Ukraine, there really is no one else than Zelensky who can help him. If he really wants to get to the bottom of Russiagate, again, there really is no one else but Zelensky who can help him. So Donald Trump may be able, or will try, I think, to do whatever he can. Of course, there's Donald Trump, there's the American deep state, which has the diametrically opposite.
I was just about to say that they're going to be trying to crash
exactly
the whole thing. For all the reasons that you mentioned that Donald Trump may want to prop it up, they're going to want to crash it.
Exactly. So, we are going to see, unfortunately, in Ukraine now, American domestic problems are going to start affecting the Ukraine's ongoing political crisis. A political crisis, by the way, which began in 1991 when Ukraine became independent, has never been resolved and only ever seems to get worse. But now, on top of all of that, they've got the problem of the United States battling it over. Now, potentially, there is another player, and that, of course, is Russia. The Russians probably would want to do a deal. They'd want a deal of some kind, which might eventually draw Ukraine or some parts of Ukraine back into their orbit. And I can imagine that there are some people in Russia who probably want to see Zelensky succeed. But we have again exactly the same problem. If the Russians try to help Zelensky, he gets branded by the ultra-nationalists within Ukraine as a Russian stooge. And of course, the deep state in Washington becomes even more antagonistic to him. So it's very clear and obvious who his enemies are. It's not so clear and obvious who his friends are. He still has a lot of popular support that is diminishing. He has some support from Kolomoisky, the oligarch, but that's dangerous and unstable. And he actually needs a lot of luck and a lot of skill. And at the moment, he seems to be short on both.
Yeah, putting your faith in Kolomoisky. I don't know about that one. Alexander, very quickly game plan this out a little bit. How do you see this unfolding short term?
As I said, I still see the European Union counselling all these oligarchs. At the end of the day, we don't want to see another coup in Ukraine. I mean, we've already the one we've just had, the one we had in 2014, has caused us enough problems. We don't want another one that's going to cause us even more problems. So I think he's going to remain president, but I think also that he's going to see his authority slip and drift. And we could very well find ourselves in a situation where Ukraine becomes completely paralyzed and where the government, in effect, in Ukraine, to all intents and purposes, ceases to function. There is another major concern, which is, of course, his economic situation is looking increasingly precarious. The Ukrainians churn out statistics which appear to suggest that the Ukrainian economy has been growing reasonably well this year. No one on the ground that I know actually believes that. The IMF is at the moment pretty close to pulling the plug, because we've spoken about how they gave lots and lots of money to Ukraine and how all that money just disappeared. And on top of everything else, the Russians are busy completing their pipelines, Turk Stream and Nord Stream, and they don't seem to be able to agree a new transit deal with Ukraine. So it could be that economically, Ukraine could find itself in a very difficult situation next year. So all of these things are coming together, and they're not coming together in a very good way. But I suspect the line with Zelensky will just hold, in the sense that he will remain president, but he will become ever less effective.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Click on that notifications bell to make sure you get notifications when we do push out a video. And remember to hit that like button and share the video with everybody you know. And also get a copy of this video in audio format. Follow us on iTunes and on Soundcloud. You'll find links to those channels in the description box as well. And please donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. You will also find links to those platforms also down below in the description box, and your donation really helps keep this channel up and running. And go to the Duran shop, pick up some magic mugs, some polo shirts, V-necks, t-shirts, stickers, all kinds of good merchandise.
All sorts of amazing things, if I may say. And of course, if I may start with our magic mugs. We've been talking a bit about Ukraine, and with the name Putin came up. He drinks from a mug which has the same emblem as this one, which is the emblem of the Russian Federation. That's the Russian Federation's double-headed eagle. Actually, very elegant and stylish it is. It looks great on any mug. It looks fantastic on one of our mugs. Beautiful porcelain, 15-ounce, strong, light, elegant, marvelous mug. I mean, I drink tea from it, also coffee. Today's been a cold day, so I've been drinking English breakfast tea with milk, which is a perfect tea just for me from a mug like this. And of course, Alex is right to refer to these polo shirts. I should say that just the other day we were watching Thunderball, the James Bond film with Sean Connery, and my wife saw Sean Connery wearing a polo shirt, and she said, "You look exactly the same when you wear one of these Duran shirts." It was the same color, by the way, which is quite striking, as the one I'm wearing now. Well, I may not be quite as, shall we say, charismatic as Sean Connery, but, you know, that was said to me by my wife, and was very flattering. So if you wear shirts like this, maybe you will get comments like that. I've had lots of other, actually, very, very favorable comments when I appear in these really smart, epitome of smart casual shirts that we are wearing, that we are making and selling, and which I'm wearing now. So you can find shirts like this on our shop. You can find, as Alex said, other types of shirts. T-shirts, V-neck shirts, long sleeve T-shirts, short sleeve T-shirts. You can find hoodies, hats, stickers, amazing things. Alex has been refreshing our shop with all sorts of new products. All our shirts, by the way, come with a Duran double-headed eagle, which is different from the Russian one. You can see that it's actually a more, how shall I say, thoughtful double-headed eagle than this one. It's less imperial and more cerebral, but it keeps an eye on all the world. That's why it has a sort of, looking in both directions. And you can, as I say, find amazing things, wonderful products, beautifully made. Our customers love them. They all say that the quality is outstanding. Our competitors think so also, because they're trying and failing to copy us and churning out inferior products, which you should avoid. So what's stopping you? Help the Duran. Go to our shop. Alex will tell you how to do it.
TheDuranShop.com. You'll find the link in the description box down below. Alexander Mercouris, thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.